This is Anchor, and you're tuned to the last frequency. If you can hear this, it means you've made it through another day. That's no small thing anymore, so take a moment, even if it's just in your mind, to acknowledge that. Surviving is an act of resistance now. You're still here, and that matters. The world has shifted, hasn't it? What used to be ordinary. Waking up, drinking coffee, hearing the hum of life around you. It feels like a lifetime ago. Now, silence stretches longer than we'd like, and when it's broken, it's rarely a good sign. But tonight, for as long as this broadcast reaches you, that silence has company. You're not alone, and neither am I. I've been thinking about the way we measure time now. It's no longer hours or days. It's breaths, steps, decisions. Each one feels heavier than it used to, more significant. Did you take shelter in the right spot? Did you ration well enough to make it until the next opportunity? Every choice feels like a gamble, and yet here you are. So, whatever you've done to make it this far, keep doing it. Adaptation is survival. I've been hearing from some of you, the ones lucky enough to find ways to send messages. It's incredible, really. In a world stripped of so much, the human need to connect is still alive. A listener in the Northern Territory sent word that their group has found refuge in an old school building. They've boarded up the windows and turned the gym into a living space. They mentioned having a small generator, enough to power a few lights. It's not much, but they wrote that seeing even a dim bulb in the darkness reminded them of what we're fighting for. Small victories, right? They matter more than we realize. Speaking of connection, if you're in a place where you can safely send a message, do it. Even if it's just to let someone know you're still out there. Your voice, your presence, it carries weight. And if you can't, if you're in one of the silent zones, stay sharp. Movement can be dangerous now, especially in areas where the lines are shifting. Avoid open roads if you can. They've become hunting grounds for the desperate and the well-armed alike. The less predictable you are, the better your chances. Sometimes I wonder how many of you I'm actually reaching. Radios are fragile things, and the signals don't always hold up. But even if only one of you is listening, it's worth it. I picture you out there, maybe huddled in a corner or sitting in the dark, with only this voice to remind you that the world hasn't gone completely silent. I hope you're safe. I hope you found some kind of shelter, even if it's temporary. Temporary has become the new normal, hasn't it? Nothing feels permanent anymore. Wherever you are, take a moment to breathe. Even now, it's easy to forget that, just to breathe. You're still here. You're still listening. That's a victory. For tonight, that's enough. Let's see if we can make it to tomorrow. I've been thinking a lot about what it means to endure. It's not just about surviving, is it? It's about holding on to some piece of yourself. Something that reminds you of who you were before all of this. Maybe it's a memory, a small ritual, or a simple act of kindness you can still offer someone else. Whatever it is, don't let it slip away. This world is doing its best to strip us down to nothing, but you're more than what's been taken from you. Remember that. I've received a few more messages from listeners, and I want to share them with you. One came from a small group near what used to be the Central Valley. They've been scavenging farm equipment and trying to grow something, anything, to supplement the dwindling supplies. They wrote about finding a patch of wild onions growing near a creek, a discovery that sparked hope among their group. Imagine that, a handful of onions, enough to make them believe tomorrow could be a little better than today. It's strange what we find ourselves cherishing now, but maybe it's not so strange after all. It's the little things, the unexpected victories, that keep us going. Another message came from someone farther north. They mentioned that a section of the old rail system is still intact and might be a safer way to travel if you're in the area. I won't give exact coordinates, you never know who else might be listening, but for those close enough, it could be worth investigating. Be careful, though. Rail lines might seem deserted, but they often attract the kind of people who are better avoided. Always trust your instincts, and if something feels off, it probably is. For those of you without the luxury of movement, I've been thinking about the best ways to strengthen what you already have. If you're in a group, make sure everyone has a role, no matter how small. Purpose is as important as food and water. It gives people something to focus on, something to hold on to when the world around them feels like it's falling apart. And if you're alone, well, you already know what it takes to stay alive. You've proven it every day so far. Keep trusting yourself. I wonder how many of you are listening right now, surrounded by darkness, the way I am. It's strange, isn't it? To feel connected to people you'll never meet, to share this fragile thread of hope that stretches across miles of uncertainty. But it's there and it's real. That's the power of this broadcast, I think. It reminds us that, even in the worst of times, we're not truly alone. We're all part of something bigger, even if we can't see it. So, wherever you are tonight, I hope you're warm, I hope you're fed, and I hope you found a reason to keep going. Sometimes that reason is as simple as hearing a voice, knowing someone else is out there too. Let this be your reminder. You are not forgotten, and you are not alone. We'll get through this one breath, one step, one day at a time. Stay with me. Let's keep moving forward. If you're still listening, welcome back. Tonight, I want to give you an update on some of the things I've been hearing. The front lines are shifting again, which means more movement, more chaos. For those in the northern sectors, it's time to stay low. Avoid any paths that look too well worn, whether by vehicles or boots. Anything predictable becomes a target these days. One listener sent a warning about drones. Not the kind that deliver supplies or scan for survivors, but the kind you don't hear until it's too late. They spotted one near an old industrial zone, circling slowly before vanishing into the clouds. If you see anything unusual in the sky, don't wait around to figure out what it is. Find cover. The days of looking up with wonder are gone. Now, looking up might just be the last thing you do. For those of you still trying to move between zones, I have some sobering news. Reports are coming in about the main bridge near the eastern sector. It's gone now. Blown to pieces, likely on purpose to cut off an escape route. If you were planning to head that way, find another path. The terrain is rough, but rivers can be crossed if you're careful. Remember, even the most unlikely route could be the safest. Desperation pushes us to take risks, but calculated risks are the only ones worth taking. Not everything is bad news, though. I've heard of a group in the Southern Territories that managed to secure an underground bunker. It's small and they're crowded, but they're safe for now. They've rigged up a ventilation system using parts scavenged from an old factory. They've even got a small water filtration unit. It's not much, but it's enough to give them hope. And hope, as fragile as it is, can make all the difference. For those of you without access to shelter, keep an eye on the landscape. Natural formations can sometimes offer the best protection. Cliffs, caves, even dense tree lines can shield you from sight and sound. A listener from the Western Ranges wrote in to say they've been surviving this way for weeks, moving from one hidden spot to the next. They've learned to listen for the sounds of the land, birds going silent, the rustle of leaves, the crack of a branch. These are the cues that tell you when you're not alone. Trust them. Sometimes I wonder how many of you out there are traveling alone. It's harder, I know. You're your own lookout, your own provider, your own protector. But being alone also means you move faster. You make decisions without hesitation. There's strength in that, even if it doesn't always feel like it. If you're out there on your own tonight, just remember that every step you've taken to get here means you've already beaten the odds. Don't stop now. I'll keep sharing what I can as the news comes in. It's not much, but maybe it'll be enough to get someone through another day. And if you've got news of your own to share, keep trying to send it. Every word, every scrap of information could be the thing that saves someone else. That's the power of connection, even in a world that seems determined to sever every last thread of it. Keep moving, keep listening, and don't give up. There's still more to come. I've been receiving more messages lately, and it's remarkable how resourceful people have become. Survival doesn't just happen. It's an art, a skill sharpened by necessity. One message I received came from a small group that managed to restore a shortwave radio in the remnants of an old fire station. They said it took weeks of scavenging for parts and figuring out how to make it work again, but they've been able to connect with a few other survivors within range. It's not much, but it's a start. One more thread in this fragile web we're all trying to keep intact. For those of you with limited resources, let me share something useful that came from one of their broadcasts. They've been making water filters using layers of charcoal, sand, and gravel. It's not perfect, but it's enough to turn contaminated water into something drinkable. They've even rigged up a system to collect rainwater when the skies cooperate. Simple, and it works. If you're near any abandoned homes or stores, look for materials like coffee filters, plastic bottles, or buckets. You can make do with what's available if you know where to start. There's another message I want to pass along. This one from a lone traveler. They've been staying near what used to be a major highway, scavenging supplies from abandoned vehicles. They mentioned something important. Many of the cars still have small food, water, or even medical supplies hidden inside. People fled in a hurry, leaving behind things they couldn't carry. If you're brave enough to check, you might find something that could keep you going another day. But be cautious. Where there are abandoned cars, there are often people watching, waiting for easy targets. Move quickly, take only what you need, and leave no trace behind. I know these little victories can feel insignificant against the weight of everything else, but they matter. Every drop of water, every scrap of food, every bit of warmth. These are the things keeping us alive. Survival isn't about big gestures. It's about the small, steady choices we make each day. It's easy to lose sight of that when the world feels so impossibly vast and dangerous. But it's true. You're still here because of the decisions you've made, no matter how small they seemed at the time. If you're listening right now, I want you to think about one thing you've done today to keep yourself alive. Maybe it was finding a safe place to rest, or rationing your supplies, or simply deciding to keep going when it felt easier to give up. Whatever it was, remember it. Those moments are what define us now. They're proof that you're stronger than the world wants you to believe. For tonight, let's hold on to those moments. Let's remind ourselves that even when the world is broken, we are not. You've made it this far, and that's something no one can take from you. Stay steady. Keep listening. We'll face tomorrow when it comes. I've been thinking a lot about hope lately, and how it's managed to cling to us. Even now, it's a fragile thing, isn't it? Like a flame flickering in the wind. It can feel so small, so insignificant, but it refuses to go out. That's what makes it powerful. No matter how much this world tries to crush us, we keep carrying that spark forward. Sometimes it's all we have. One of the letters I received recently captured that idea perfectly. A listener wrote about how they and their family found an abandoned greenhouse on the outskirts of a ruined town. Most of the glass was shattered, and the plants inside were overgrown and wild, but they decided to stay. They spent days clearing debris, patching what they could, and planting whatever seeds they could scavenge from nearby. It wasn't much at first, but they said that seeing the first sprout emerge from the soil felt like a miracle. Life, they said, has a way of finding a way through even the smallest cracks. That story stayed with me. It's a reminder that even in the darkest places, there's potential for something new to grow. Maybe that's what hope is, a seed we plant, even when we're not sure it will survive. It's a quiet act of defiance, a way of telling this broken world that we're still here, and we're not giving up. For those of you out there who feel like the weight of all this is too much, I want you to remember that you're not alone in carrying it. There are others like you, fighting the same battles, making the same impossible choices. You may never see their faces or know their names, but they're out there. Every step you take is a step someone else is taking too. And together, even if we're separated by miles of ruin, we're holding on. That's what matters. A listener from the eastern region shared something interesting in their message. They've been collecting scraps of metal and fabric to make crude but effective windbreaks around their shelter. It's simple but ingenious. They said it's helped keep the worst of the cold and wind out, giving them a little more comfort at night. It's a small thing, but sometimes small things make all the difference. If you've got the resources, give it a try. Even the slightest improvement to your situation can lift your spirits in ways you don't expect. I know it's hard to find hope when everything around us feels so fragile, but that's exactly why we have to keep looking for it. It's in the tiny victories, the quiet moments, the stubborn will to keep moving forward. It's in the fact that you're listening to this right now, that you're still here, that you haven't let this world take everything from you. So, tonight, let's carry that spark a little further. Let's keep planting seeds, both in the soil and in our hearts, even if we don't know what will come of them. Because one day, they might grow into something beautiful. And when that day comes, we'll be ready to see it. Keep going. Keep listening. We're not done yet. Before we dive into tonight's update, I want to remind you of something. No matter how chaotic things get, there's always a rhythm to survival. Pattern. You find it in the smallest moments, the little rituals you repeat to keep yourself steady. Maybe it's the way you prepare your food, the path you choose when you move, or even just the way you count the seconds as you wait for danger to pass. These patterns are your anchor. Hold on to them. They matter more than you might realize. I've got some news from the southern sectors. A group there has been mapping out abandoned buildings and marking which ones still have supplies. It's risky work, but they've managed to create a rough network of safe zones for anyone passing through. They didn't give exact locations. They're smart enough to know that information can fall into the wrong hands. But they did mention a few landmarks to keep an eye out for. Old water towers, crumbling barns, anything that stands out against the landscape. If you're in that area, those markers might be your lifeline. For those of you closer to the Northern Territories, be aware that movement has been spotted near the old industrial zones. It's unclear who or what is behind it, but the signs are there. Tracks in the mud, disturbed debris, even a few scattered campfires. Could be scavengers, it could be something worse. Either way, keep your distance. Sometimes the smartest move is the one you don't make. Avoiding conflict isn't cowardice, it's strategy. I want to share something practical tonight, something you can use. A listener sent in a detailed description of how they've been making improvised fire starters. Simple, really. They've been using cotton balls coated in petroleum jelly, packed into small containers they scavenged from abandoned homes. These fire starters ignite quickly and burn long enough to get even damp wood going. It's a small trick, but one that can make a big difference when you're out in the cold. If you've got access to those materials, it's worth giving it a try. And now, a story that gave me pause. Another listener wrote about finding an old photograph in the pocket of a jacket they salvaged. The photo showed a family, a mother, a father, 2 kids, all smiling at the camera. The listener didn't know who they were, of course, but they decided to keep the picture. They said it reminded them that every piece of rubble, every abandoned item, was part of someone's life before all of this. It's easy to forget that sometimes. The world feels so vast and impersonal now, but it's made up of countless stories, fragments of lives that once seemed as permanent as the ground beneath our feet. As you move through this world, don't lose sight of those stories. They're everywhere, tucked away in the corners of forgotten places, waiting to be noticed. Maybe one day, someone will stumble across something of yours and wonder about the person you were. Let that thought remind you of the humanity we're all fighting to hold on to. Keep moving, keep observing, and above all, keep listening. We've still got miles to go, but we'll get there together, one day at a time. I've received some unsettling reports tonight, and I think it's important we talk about them. There's been an increase in sightings of what some are calling the unseen enemy. I don't mean shadows in the night or rumors of ghost towns. These are deliberate movements, silent, calculated, and strange. In the eastern zones, a survivor reported seeing lights flickering in an abandoned factory, but when they approached, there was no sign of life. In another case, someone heard rhythmic sounds, like machinery, coming from deep underground near a collapsed train station. I don't know what it means, but if you're in those areas, tread carefully. Some things aren't worth finding out. It's easy to let fear creep in when you hear things like this. The unknown can be more terrifying than anything else we face. But fear can also sharpen your instincts, make you more aware, more deliberate. Let it guide you when it needs to, but don't let it control you. Fear is a tool. Learn how to use it. That said, I want to turn to something a little more grounded, something you can use right now. A listener from the central sector sent in a clever idea they've been using for safe movement at night. They've been crafting makeshift lanterns from tin cans and small candles. By punching holes in the sides, they can direct the light where it's needed without casting a glow that could give away their position. It's not just practical, it's smart. When the darkness feels endless, finding a way to bring just enough light can make all the difference. And while we're on the subject of light, let me share a bit of hope that came in earlier today. A group near the southern mountains has been working to restore power to an old hydroelectric station. They've managed to get a few lights working in their settlement, enough to make them feel like they've reclaimed a piece of what was lost. They said the sight of those lights flickering on was enough to make people cry. It's not just about the electricity, it's what it represents. A reminder that even in the ruins, there's a chance to rebuild. Hope comes in all forms, doesn't it? A tiny flame, a faint glow, a single step forward when everything tells you to stop. Sometimes it's nothing more than the act of listening, of knowing that someone else is out there. You might not see them, might never know their name, but their presence matters. It reminds you that you're not carrying this weight alone. So, tonight, as you listen to this broadcast, take a moment to think about what keeps you moving forward. Maybe it's a memory of someone you've lost, a promise you made to yourself, or the simple need to see another sunrise. Whatever it is, hold on to it. Let it guide you through the darkness. The unseen enemy might be out there, but so are we. And as long as we keep going, they can't take everything from us. Keep your wits about you, stay. Stop moving forward. We're still here, we're still listening, and we're not done yet. Tonight's broadcast is going to be a little different. I intercepted something earlier today, a faint, irregular transmission, almost buried in static. It wasn't the usual chatter or distress call. It was a sequence of numbers, repeated over and over, 729. Then it cut out. No explanation, no source, just the numbers. I've been trying to piece together what it might mean, but so far, I've got nothing. Could be coordinates, could be a code, or it could be a trap. If anyone listening has the ability to decipher it, tread carefully. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. Signals like this remind me of how much we still don't know about what's happening out there. The world feels smaller now, reduced to the few places we dare to move through, but the mysteries only seem to grow. Every abandoned building, every stretch of forest, every quiet town has a story to tell. Some of those stories are harmless, fragments of the lives we left behind. Others are something else entirely. If you're curious, let that curiosity serve you, not lead you into danger. The unknown can be as much a weapon as anything else we face. For now, let's turn to something more practical. A listener sent in a tip for those of you who find yourselves needing to move silently at night. They've been wrapping their boots with strips of cloth, binding them tightly around the soles to muffle their steps. It's not perfect, but it's enough to keep from drawing attention. They also mentioned using charcoal from old fires to smear across their hands and face, breaking up their outline in low light. Simple, effective, and worth remembering. There's another update I want to share, this one from the Western Foothills. A small community there has been using mirrors and reflective surfaces to signal each other from a distance. It's a low-tech solution, but in a world where noise can get you killed, it's genius. They've managed to maintain contact across several miles without drawing unwanted attention. If you're part of a group spread out over a larger area, consider it. A flash of light might just save someone's life. But for all the strategies and tips, let's not forget the human side of this. I received a message earlier from someone who's been traveling alone for weeks. They wrote about how they've started talking to themselves, not out of madness, but out of a need for company. They said it helps them stay grounded, reminding them that they're still here, still a person, not just a shadow moving through the ruins. I thought about that a lot today, how easy it is to lose yourself out here, how important it is to hold on to something that reminds you of who you are. So, if you're listening to this and you've been feeling like a ghost, like a fragment of who you used to be, let me remind you of something. You're still real. You're still here. You're still part of something bigger than the silence. Even if you don't know anyone else is out there, you're not alone. Not as long as this voice reaches you. Stay cautious with that transmission. Keep your steps light, your signals sharp, and your mind steady. We don't know what's waiting out there, but we'll face it the way we've faced everything else. Together, even from a distance. Keep going. Keep listening. We'll figure this out one day at a time. I want to start tonight by sharing something sent in by a listener who's been holding on in what used to be a quiet stretch of farmland. They wrote about a moment they experienced recently, one that stayed with me long after I read it. They described stepping outside after a long day of scavenging and looking up at the night sky. For the first time in a while, the clouds had cleared, and they could see the stars. They said it reminded them of how vast and unknowable the universe is, even as our own little world feels like it's collapsing in on itself. They wrote, "The stars don't change, no matter what happens down here. They've seen it all before." It's a simple thought, isn't it? But in times like these, simplicity has a way of cutting through the noise. When everything feels out of control, looking at something steady, something constant, can be grounding. So, if you're in a place where you can look up tonight, do it. Even if it's just for a moment. Let it remind you that there's still something bigger than all of this. I've got some updates for those of you near the central zones. Movement has been reported along the old highway routes. It's unclear whether it's organized or random, but the message was clear. Avoid the roads if you can. They're too exposed, too easy to monitor. If you need to cross open terrain, do it quickly and with purpose. Stay low, move at dusk or dawn, and always have an exit plan. A listener from the outskirts of what used to be a major city sent in another survival tip, one that might help those of you in colder regions. They've been making makeshift insulation for their shelter using layers of cardboard and plastic sheeting. It's not elegant, but they said it's made a noticeable difference in keeping out the chill. Sometimes the simplest materials can have the biggest impact. If you've got access to any old packaging or tarps, don't overlook them. They might just save you from a cold night. But tonight's message isn't just about surviving. It's about remembering why we're still fighting to make it through. A listener wrote about a song they used to hear as a child, one their mother used to hum while doing chores. They said they found themselves humming it recently, without even realizing it. It struck them that in a world so intent on taking everything away, even the smallest memory can feel like a rebellion. The melody reminded them of home, of warmth, of a time when survival wasn't the only thing that mattered. That's the power of holding on to the pieces of ourselves that this world can't touch. So, if you're listening, I want you to think about something that reminds you of who you were before all of this. Maybe it's a song, a memory, a fragment of a dream you haven't let go of. Whatever it is, hold it close. Let it be your anchor, your reminder that you're still more than just a survivor. You're still a person, and no matter how hard things get, that's something worth fighting for. Keep steady, keep watching, and keep finding those moments that remind you of who you are. The stars may not change, but neither does the resilience that's kept us alive this long. Keep going. We're not done yet. Let's talk about resilience tonight. Not the kind that's loud or flashy, but the quiet kind. The kind that keeps you putting one foot in front of the other, even when it feels like the ground is crumbling beneath you. Resilience doesn't have to be heroic. It doesn't have to be big. Sometimes, it's as small as choosing to wake up and face another day. Sometimes, it's just listening to this broadcast and reminding yourself that you're still here. That's enough. I want to share a story that came in from a listener who's been traveling alone. They wrote about a moment when they felt like giving up. Supplies were low, shelter was nowhere in sight, and every step forward felt like a mistake. Then, as they were walking along an old dirt road, they found something unexpected. A flower growing in the middle of the path. It wasn't anything grand, just a simple bloom, defiant in a place where nothing should have been alive. They said it stopped them in their tracks, not because it changed their situation, but because it reminded them that life, even the smallest bit of it, is stubborn. Sometimes, that's all it takes to keep going, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, there's still something beautiful. It's moments like that, isn't it? The ones that catch you off guard, that remind you there's still a world beyond the chaos. I hope you've had a moment like that recently. If not, I hope one finds you soon. They're rare, but they're worth holding on to when they come. For those of you near the Western Hills, there's a piece of news you might find useful. A listener reported finding an old cave system in that area. It's hidden, tucked into the side of a ridge, and it offers natural protection from both the elements and prying eyes. They didn't go too far in, but they said it looks deep enough to shelter a small group. If you're nearby and need a place to rest, it could be worth investigating. Just be cautious. Nature doesn't give its gifts freely. Check for unstable ground, wildlife, and anything else that might have claimed the space before you. Another listener from the northern sectors sent in a practical tip. They've been using shards of broken mirrors to create signals during the day. A quick flash of light can travel farther than you might think, especially if you're trying to communicate across open terrain. It's a good trick to have in your back pocket, whether you're looking to send a message or find someone who's lost. Just make sure you're careful about where you aim that light. Not every pair of eyes watching the horizon has good intentions. As I say these things, I wonder how many of you are still out there, tuning in, taking these words and finding something useful in them. Maybe it's just a handful of you, scattered across the ruins of what used to be. Or maybe it's more than I'll ever know. Either way, the fact that you're listening means that you're still holding on. And as long as you're holding on, so am I. Resilience is quiet, stubborn. It's the thing that keeps you going when every part of you wants to stop. And tonight, as you sit in whatever shelter you've carved out for yourself, I hope you can feel it. I hope it reminds you that you've made it this far, and you can keep going. One step, one breath, one moment at a time. Stay safe. Stay resilient. We're not done yet. Earlier tonight, I intercepted something unusual. It wasn't the numbers from before, this was different. A faint, fragmented transmission, almost too weak to pick up. The words were broken, scattered like leaves in the wind. But one phrase came through clear enough. We are still here. That's all. No location, no context, just those 4 words. I've been sitting with them ever since, wondering who sent them, where they might be, and what they were. To say. Were they reaching out for help? Reassuring someone else? Or maybe they were reminding themselves. We are still here. Simple, but it carries weight, doesn't it? I don't know who you are, but if you're the one who sent that message and you're listening now, I want you to know that it was received. Those words traveled farther than you might have imagined, and they landed where they were needed. Maybe that's what this all comes down to. Sending out whatever fragments we can, hoping they reach someone who needs to hear them. For those of you near the southern zones, I have some important updates. There's been increased movement in the area, vehicles, scattered groups, and what sounds like the distant echo of heavy machinery. It's hard to tell whether it's organized or chaotic, but either way, it's a sign to stay hidden. If you're in that region, keep to the shadows and avoid open areas. The less predictable your movements, the better your chances. A listener from the Eastern Plains sent in a story that I want to share. They've been traveling alone, moving between abandoned farms and trying to find any supplies that haven't already been stripped bare. One day, they stumbled across an old barn, its roof half collapsed and its walls covered in vines. Inside, they found something they didn't expect. A small, handwritten journal, left behind by someone who must have been there before. The pages were filled with simple entries, notes about the weather, sketches of birds, and lists of chores. Nothing remarkable, really, but the listener said it felt like a glimpse into a world that no longer exists. A world where people worried about planting crops and fixing fences instead of surviving another day. It struck me how much those small things can mean now. A journal, a sketch, a handful of words left behind. They're reminders that even in the darkest times, people were still living, still finding ways to hold on to what made them human. Maybe one day, someone will stumble across something of yours. A note, a carving, a memory etched into the world, and it will remind them of the same thing. So tonight, as you sit wherever you are, I want you to think about what you're leaving behind. Not just the physical things, but the impressions, the echoes of who you are. Even if the world feels hollow, you're still a part of it. Your presence, your choices, your survival, they all matter. We are still here, Those words stayed with me, and now I'm passing them on to you. Let them be your mantra tonight. Let them remind you that as long as you're breathing, you're part of something bigger than the silence. Keep holding on. Keep sending out your fragments. You never know whose hands they might fall into. As we come to the end of tonight's broadcast, I find myself thinking about the weight of endings. Not just this one, but all the ones we've faced along the way. The endings of places we once called home, of routines we used to take for granted, of connections we thought would last forever. And yet, here we are, still standing, still listening. It's strange, isn't it? How every ending carries within it the seeds of something new. Maybe not something better, but something that proves we're still alive, still moving forward. A listener sent in a message today that spoke to this. They've been traveling with a small group for weeks now, navigating the outskirts of what used to be a bustling city. They said the hardest part hasn't been the hunger or the cold, though those have been constant companions. It's been the quiet, the way the silence settles into everything, wrapping around them like a shroud. They wrote, "We didn't realize how much noise we needed until it was gone. It made me think about how much we take sound for granted. The hum of life, the voices of people, even the chaos of traffic or crowded streets. Now, every sound feels amplified, like it carries a weight it didn't before. Maybe that's why this broadcast matters. It's not just about the words or the updates. It's about breaking through the silence, reminding you that there's still something on the other side of it, that you're not alone in hearing it. For those of you who are listening tonight, I want to leave you with something. A thought, a reminder, maybe even a challenge. In a world that's trying so hard to erase us, to turn us into ghosts, every breath you take is an act of defiance. Every decision you make, every step you take, every time you refuse to give in, you're proving that you still have a place here. That no matter how much has been lost, you are not lost. A listener from the Western Territories wrote about finding an old, battered flag in the rubble of a school. It was torn, dirty, and barely recognizable, but they picked it up anyway. They didn't do it out of patriotism or nostalgia. They did it because it felt like reclaiming something. A small act of saying, "This is still ours. We are still here." I think about that a lot now. How even the smallest gestures can feel monumental when the world has taken so much. So tonight, as this broadcast fades into the quiet, I want you to think about what you're reclaiming. Maybe it's a piece of who you used to be, a memory you thought you'd lost, or a part of the world you refuse to let go of. Whatever it is, hold it close. Let it remind you of what you're fighting for. Let it remind you of what's still worth saving. We've come a long way together, you and I, even if we've never met. And while I don't know what tomorrow holds, I do know this. As long as you're listening, as long as we're sharing this moment, we're not alone. Keep moving, keep breathing, keep hoping. Until next time, this is Anchor signing off.